fundraising dinner at OCBC, 50 people, and I think I'm slowly moving up the food chain. I'm mixing metaphors, but I used to only take out trash and do dishes, and now I'm starting to chop vegetables. But my hands are broken. I can barely gasho, and I've been putting cream on my hands. And then I got home last night after the dinner, and I realized I left my favorite coffee mug there. And this is going to have a little bit to do with my talk, but it's my tall black metal OCBC coffee thermos. So I know how to say that without thinking. That's the correct order of adjectives, because I'm a fluent English speaker. So I think it's somewhere in the social hall kitchen. Reverend Harada is out looking for it right now, and I hope I get it back. And then I think Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto came here and spoke. He also was at the Pacific Winter Seminar a couple weeks ago, and he talked a lot about words and names and language. And language plays a really important part in Pure Land Buddhism. I've mentioned this before, but some schools are kind of silent, like Zen. You practice, you're still and you're silent in meditation. And this happens in yoga as well. And then there's also schools of Buddhism that are a little bit more noisy and use sound. And Pure Land Buddhism is in that category. And sometimes Americans only think of Buddhism as something passive and silent. So, there's a lot of chanting in Tibetan Buddhism as well. Language, taking part with your body and vocalizing something and using names and words are the way the teachings touch our heart. So there's kind of two sides to Buddhism, but I think the silent one is more well known and accepted. We're the more noisy side. And then languages are different. I've taken a class with Reverend Harada, and we talked about the difference between English and Japanese, or English and Chinese. English tends to be, from what I've read, it's supposed to be a good language for law, science, and math, because it tends to be relatively black and white. There's not a lot of gray, and there's not a lot of nuance, so it makes it kind of good for stating factual data. So, but sometimes you can run into trouble, like I had a girl that was a friend in high school, but she wasn't my girlfriend, so I don't know what to call her. We don't have a good word for that. And then one time, Linda and I were in the line to see a movie, and there were an older couple in front of us, and I said, I really like this theater because I said, my wife and I really like to watch adult movies. And Linda went. I meant movies for adults, like Roma, that kind of a movie. So a lot of times I get tongue-tied because I can't find the word. It's too extreme. And then I know I'm a little dangerous with Chinese. Chinese tends to be, there's a lot of gray. Every word has a wide range of meaning, and the grammar is relatively loose. And then in Japanese, it tends to be passive. The language tends to be passive. So like the verbs and the activities are at the end of the sentence. The grammar's a lot different, which is hard for an American to learn, at least this American. And I even looked it up on the internet. Passive language is actually frowned upon in English. Like if you say, this is the ball that I have thrown, a lot of times you'll get marked off in an English class because it's too passive. They like a more dynamic, active, declarative sentences. That's one of the reasons why supposedly the Beatles are popular, because their lyrics are short, declarative sentences. Help, right? I want to hold your hand. They're really to the point. So I took, I can read kanji. I took like 2 years of Japanese. It started out really well, but it didn't end very well. And then I took 3 years of Spanish in high school. I really, really liked Spanish. And I remember there were a lot of neat things about Spanish that I liked. And I think one of the reasons why I'm so interested in language is I'm a computer programmer, or I was. And the first computer programming language I took, or learned, it took me months to learn. But then the second one took maybe 2 months. And then the third, the fourth, and the fifth, I could pick up in like a week. And I think linguists are like this, right? After you've learned your third language, the fourth one's probably pretty easy. So learning computer languages were very easy for me. And I knew lots. And there's a theory in computer programming that the language you use kind of informs the way you look at problems. So, it's like saying if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, if you use C or C++, you solve problems, you think in that language, and that's how you attack problems. So the language we use really affects the way we think and the way we see the world. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that today. So the first thing I did is I thought I had this slide, but I thought this was my first slide, but I actually this was my first slide at OCBC. And I was going to talk about how I wasn't a very good speller. And one of the Dharma school teachers the Dharma school teachers are really good. Immediately her hand went up in the air. She said, "You made a spelling mistake." So it's not what's in an name, it's what is in a name. So this is another one of those weird little things in English, right? That if it's a vowel comes before an A, we put an N. I don't know why, but it's the rule. And I broke it. I broke the rule here. So I kind of wanted to talk about English and Spanish today. I am not a good speller. I'm not a very good speller. And I'm not very good at grammar. When I took Japanese, she insulted me a lot. She said, she meant well, but she said, older people like me have a lot of trouble learning language because that skill is well developed when you're young, but as you get older, it gets harder and harder. She also said, because I'm a math computer scientist, I don't like to experiment. We only speak. If we're positive, we're right. So that was another problem I had, is I didn't like to talk in class because I wasn't positive I was correct. And she said, to learn language, you have to be free and experiment. And computer programmers, we don't do that. We like rules. And then the other thing she said to me that was really harsh, but I couldn't think of a comeback because she was right. She goes, "John, how can I teach you Japanese grammar when you don't even know English grammar?" And I was like, And when I was in high school, the reason for this, I'm going to blame it on my teachers. When I was in high school in the 70s, I had a lot of teachers that were raised in the 60s. And so we never really learned grammar. What we did is we'd read Hemingway, we'd read Mark Twain, we'd read Faulkner, J.D. Salinger, and then we'd write. So we would write and write and write, and we'd read and read and read. And I'm a relatively good writer, but I learned it kind of through osmosis. By reading good writers, you become a good writer, even though you don't know the grammar rules. And the other thing I did, I tried to write like Mark Twain, long, flowery sentences, and I wasn't very good at it. And then I read Hemingway, and I'm like, oh, you can write like 4 or 5 word sentences. So I tend to, the reason why I used to get better grades in English is they only marked you off for the mistakes you made. So I would just make my sentences very short, no commas, no semicolons. And I would get 100% because I didn't. So that was my trick. So one of the things I'm really not good at is spelling. And what I would do for English spelling tests is I would memorize the words that morning at breakfast, and I'd run in and I'd get like 9 out of 10, and then the next day I'd forget. But Spanish is great, just like Japanese. Every sound is consistent, and it doesn't matter who the neighboring letters are. So in English, the sounds change depending on your neighbor, but Japanese and Spanish, it's always the same sound. So for for Spanish spelling tests and Japanese, you could just go in, and if you have a good ear, you could get 100%, because you just write what you hear. So this is an actual slide from one of the classes I taught at OCBC. Do you spot the spelling mistake? Yes. Somebody came up to me and said, this is a Buddhist canon. This is a Buddhist canon. And I didn't know what the mistake was. I mean, he told me I should have used just one N. So this is a canon, a collection of texts, not not a weapon that shoots large, heavy, spherical projectiles. So this is a Buddhist canon with one N. It makes a huge difference. And the other thing I've heard is that, and this makes me feel good too, I've heard that some people are innately good at spelling and other people aren't innately good at spelling. And it's almost by birth. So now if you're not good at spelling, that doesn't mean you should stop studying, but some people are just very good at it. So this is a picture of the Chinese Mahayana canon. And we're going to read an essay in adult study by Jan Nadier. I used to call her Jan Nadier, but it's Jan Nadier. How was I supposed to know her last name's French? So that proves my point. It's Nadier, not Nadier. I looked this up to make sure it was true. There's a quote by her that says the Buddhist canon, Mahayana canon, I think I've told you this, is 500,000 pages. So 500,000 pages of text. So it's difficult for us as Buddhists to read 500,000 pages of texts. I think it's like 10,000 pages a year for 50 years. So I want to go over some of the things about English that's always irritated me from a computer programming point of view. It bothers me in English that the question mark is at the end of the sentence, right? Because if it's a long sentence, you'd be like, Albert Einstein discovered relativity. But you don't know. You don't know it's a question until you get to the very end. So I really like this about Spanish. A question is coming, and you read it like, Albert Einstein discovered relativity? So I think this would really help teachers that have to read out loud to class if you knew what was coming. This is another one I don't like. The exclamation point is at the end of the sentence. So, come downstairs, the house is on fire! I think this is not a good, this is, from a computer science point of view, this is important information that should be moved forward in the sentence. So, this is good. Come downstairs, the house is on fire! Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, the way I get out of this is there was only one fire in the house. It wasn't like there was a fire in the living room and there was a fire in the kitchen. There's one fire. Some of this isn't my fault. The excuse I make is that, that type-in completion on the computer. So I blame it on that. This is automated poor spelling. So this is another thing I really like about Spanish. You know what the thing is before they describe it. So this is, the rice is red, rather than red rice. So I always think that's weird. You're telling me all about the qualities of this thing, and I don't know what it is yet. I think that it's backwards. And I just found out that French is even weirder. English always puts them in the front, Spanish always puts them in the back. I guess French sometimes puts them in the front and sometimes puts them in the back. So that would be difficult. So this is an example. The beautiful, long, curved, old red Italian steel racing. It's a racing car. It's a car. So in Spanish, you would lead, I think, with car. So I wanted to share this with you. This is a rule, and because I'm a computer programmer, I love rules. There's an adjective order rule in English, and there's some, we have a couple English teachers, retired high school English teachers, and they told me later they've never ever heard of this rule, which is good, because that's kind of the point to my talk. So, like the thing I said, that I had my tall black metal OCBC coffee thermos. It would sound really weird if I said my OCBC metal black tall coffee. If you mix up the adjectives, it doesn't make sense because there's an order. And we all know it, but we've never been taught it. So the ugly red wooden box sounds correct, but the wooden red ugly box just sounds wrong. And we don't know why, but it just doesn't sound right to our ear. And this happened to me in my Japanese class as well. One time in Japanese I said the traffic was heavy. And I guess in Japan, they don't use heavy to describe traffic. They would say it's crowded, or they'd use some other, they don't use heavy, because heavy's weight. So if you said the traffic is heavy in Japan, it sounds like you're weighing all the cars or something. And I said, she marked it wrong, and I said, why is this wrong? The grammar's perfect, all the words are right. She goes, but nobody in Japan would ever say this. And I was like, oh, come on. We're in America. So there is a rule describing the proper order of English adjectives. And because I'm a computer programmer, I love this rule. You're supposed to start with opinion, size, then shape, then age, then color, then nationality, then material, and then purpose. So it's a beautiful, long, curved, old red Italian steel racing car. And I know it sounds weird, but everybody in this room would get this right, even though you've never actually been taught this rule. So I wanted to kind of highlight here that we pick up language in a very intuitive, immersive way by listening, and things just sound right or wrong to our ear. And we didn't really learn it by memorizing rules. And actually, you don't have enough time to be fluent in English if you're trying to rattle off this rule in your head. Like when I said my tall black metal OCBC coffee thermos, I just texted that to Reverend without thinking. I didn't say, oh, it's an opinion, it's metal. So the analogy I'm trying to make here is we know a lot more about Buddhism than we think we know. If we immerse ourselves in the teachings and we listen to the Dharma and we chant and we offer incense and we come and we practice, we begin to understand Buddhism as well, not necessarily perhaps knowing all the jargon and all the rules. So I think we all know a lot more than we think we do. In the same way we know a lot more about language than we think we do. So the right way is beautiful, long, curved, old red Italian steel racing car. I know this is an extreme example. And then there's always exceptions. This is wrong. Even though it follows the rule, the old tall man read a short old story about an ugly big bear. All three of those are wrong, even though they follow the rule, because you know the exceptions. Old man is a thing. It's a concept. So you don't split up old man. So you have to say tall old man. And an old short story, a short story is a genre, so you can't break that up. It's an old short story, like an old novel. And then Big Ugly Bear, I didn't quite get this one, but they said a Big Ugly is another concept that is never split. But you know this, even though you don't know this, but you know this. So in this case, old and short are qualifiers, not merely size or age designations, because old man is a social concept on its own, and short story is a genre, and this one I didn't really get. Big Ugly is a commonplace term. So I don't know. And then, so there is a rule, and you can learn it, but it's not possible to ever follow it. You don't have time. So if you want to be fluent, you can't be conjugating verbs, right? And you can't be translating in and out of English if you're doing Spanish. And I did this in Buddhism. It took me 4 years, but I was translating from Buddhism into Christianity, and then I would think about things, and then I'd reform my question in Christianity, and then I'd translate it back to Buddhism. And it was exhausting. And I couldn't keep up with the Dharma talks. And it took 4 years, but one day I realized I wasn't translating anymore. I was thinking, hearing, and speaking in Buddhism. And it took a long time. It took a long time to get rid of that translation in and out of something I was more familiar with. So one last thing I wanted to share with you that I thought was really neat about Spanish is solamente, and I checked this with our Latin speakers at OCBC. Mente means mind, and sola means alone. So if you have a mind that's alone with something, it's only. So it's very interesting. The Spanish It's the mind, like if you have an angry mind, you're angry, rather than somebody outside made me angry. So Spanish adverbs end in mente, like ly in English. Mente is a Spanish word for mind. So these are in alphabetical order. I got them off the internet. There's a whole list. And my accent probably won't be very good. But that first word, mente, I'm not very good at Spanish anymore. Angrily, to do something angrily is to do something with an angry mind. To do something in a kind way, kindly, is to do it with a kind mind. And the bottom one, to do something sincerely, is to do something with a sincere mind. So I always found this very interesting in Spanish. The language itself is the way they express their emotions is it's something that you're doing with the mind. It reflects the state of mind that you have. It's not reflecting the effect others are having on you. So this is another example in which the way they kind of conceptualize this is from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And so when we try to teach Buddhism in English, we're all struggling right now, trying to find language that's up to the task, because it's on the edge of meaning. And one of the words we talked about a lot is the word faith. You know, we tend to use Christian words in a Buddhist context, and so sometimes can be confusing. But faith, Jan Nattier actually said, or Jan Nattier, actually said that faith originally had a really broad meaning, but that it's been narrowed by Protestant Christianity to be a very specific Protestant faith. But faith can mean having confidence in a program or a process that it'll pay off. So like right now, I'm eating less calories, but my weight's not going down like I think it should. And Linda told me it takes more than a day. Right? Like yesterday I didn't have a donut and I got on the scale today and nothing happened. But she said it takes longer. You have to have confidence that if you burn more calories than you take in, it's inevitable that you'll begin to lose weight. You have to have faith, confidence, and experiential faith. One of my friends told me once that it's like I have faith that the sun's going to come up tomorrow morning, right? It gets dark at night, but I don't freak out, right? I have this faith that the sun will rise. It's that kind of faith. And the thing that gets in our way is doubt. If you doubt, you're not all in. You don't give it your all. So like, if you don't have confidence, it took me a long time to have confidence that if you study for math, your grades will go up. It's very hard to convince kids. When I was taking Algebra 1, I thought it was unfair and arbitrary, that it was just random. And it really isn't. It just seemed random because I hadn't studied and I didn't understand what was going on. But it's this kind of faith. So one of the things in America right now is struggling with language, how to take Japanese terms, Chinese terms, Indian terms. That's another problem, is there's so many languages, right? There's Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan, there's Theravadan, Pali words. How to take these words and translate them into a language that's fairly dualistic and black and white and have it resonate with people. So I've kind of been on the side of we should abandon words like faith because it's just too hard to resuscitate them and to redefine them. I tried that with the word ritual. I taught a 4-week class on Buddhist ritual, and after I gave it my all, I thought I was really proud of the class, and one of my friends came up and said, I really like your class. But he said he's a big guy, he put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, but I hate ritual, I'm never going to do ritual. And I was like, oh. So finding words that resonate. One person at OCBC yesterday said that if you use the word faith, it's so overloaded with Christian meaning that it really throws me off. But if you use a foreign word like Shinjin, that word has absolutely no meaning to me and has no relevance. It doesn't resonate with me in any way. So we're kind of stuck. We either use a word that's overloaded or we use a word that has absolutely no meaning to you. And so we're all struggling with this, with language. And one of the debates is, do we leave the words untranslated, like nirvana, or do we translate it into enlightenment? And then people say, well, that sounds like the scientific revolution in Europe in the 1700s. Enlightenment's not the age of enlightenment, it's awakening. Maybe we should use that word. So I wanted to share this with you. I guess a couple things. Language is hard. And two, I think you are understanding Buddhism through listening to the teachings, taking my class from 1 to 4 today, reading. You know a lot more than you think you do, even though it's difficult to articulate in language. So please join me in Gacho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you.